Tonight, a CBC exclusive, more information about the final moments before Myles Sanderson died in police custody after the stabbing rampage earlier this month. At the same time,
the reason that we're calling a public inquest is for the transparency.
Saskatchewan's chief coroner announces inquests into both the death of Myles Sanderson and what happened on James Smith Cree Nation and in Weldon.
And if you want to stay, you can stay.
Also, while the search continues for a pastor connected to a private Christian school and church, the students alleging years of abuse met with Saskatchewan's education minister for the first time.
This is CBC Saskatchewan News.
It is Wednesday, September 21st, and the CBC Saskatchewan News starts right now. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. It's been 2 weeks since the man accused of a stabbing rampage in Saskatchewan died in police custody. Tonight, CBC News has learned from a senior government official more about how Myles Sanderson died. Sanderson was arrested by RCMP on September 7th after eluding police for nearly 4 days. Videos taken at the time show Sanderson standing up in handcuffs. According to a senior government official briefed by law enforcement, Sanderson had consumed a quantity of pills before his arrest. This has been corroborated by multiple police, government, and health sources who all told CBC News that Sanderson consumed drugs before police took him into custody. RCMP had only said Sanderson went into medical distress after his arrest. His cause of death will be the focus of a coroner's inquest. Today, Saskatchewan's chief coroner announced there will also be an inquest into the stabbing deaths of 11 people at James Smith Cree Nation and the nearby village of Weldon. Sam Sampson reports.
With the suspect deceased, there will not be a public criminal trial.
So to get answers, the Saskatchewan Chief Coroner's Service will set up a public inquest, a public display of the facts to find out what happened on September 4th, how lives were taken away and others changed forever. The inquest will happen as close as possible to James Smith Cree Nation. It will include a jury of 6 Indigenous people to not only make recommendations to prevent future violence, but also to determine the cause of death for the 11 people who were killed.
They'll hear all the evidence given by the forensic pathologists from the police, and they decide on the manner and cause of death. That's how inquests work, right across the Commonwealth.
This first inquest will include Damien Sanderson's death, one of the 2 men initially charged with murder in the stabbing rampage. His body was found in James Smith a day after the stabbings. A separate mandatory inquest will be held later for the other man accused, Myles Sanderson. He evaded police for almost 4 days. He died in RCMP custody shortly after his arrest.
The last thing we want is to give out some preliminary information, and then witnesses at the inquest give different information, and now we've got a real quagmire of what really did happen. So it's prudent to make sure we have all the information, everything is gathered in a proper form, and then presented at an inquest.
But minutes later, an unexpected piece of information.
The preliminary results of the autopsy for Myles Sanderson, and this is very preliminary, has found no blunt force trauma causing his death.
The chief coroner and former Saskatoon police chief says he's sharing that information because there's a lot of public interest into what happened to Sanderson, but some are skeptical.
It just felt to me, though, like it was an indication that maybe the police are not to blame for the death of Myles Sanderson, which I think if that was the intention, I don't know that it was, that could just create a lot more suspicion, animosity, curiosity, and confusion.
The coroner's service says it won't release any more information until the first inquest into the victims' deaths, but that's not expected until next spring at the earliest. Sam Sampson, CBC News, Regina.
Meanwhile, leaders from James Smith Cree Nation are repeating their calls for First Nations policing. A new report from the federal government reveals many Indigenous groups across Canada want First Nations policing to be an essential service. The report, released this morning, lays out how Ottawa listened to First Nations, Métis and Inuit communities this spring. Making First Nations policing an essential service would change federal and possibly provincial laws, and it would ensure there's enough money for it no matter what.
And this move towards legislation is a real critical factor in moving forward. So I think the ducks are in a row. The political will in all parties is there. And I think we are going to be seeing some significant changes and improvements in how policing is done in our communities and in the provinces in general.
Canada's Public Safety Minister says he wants legislation on this matter tabled soon. Saskatchewan's Education Minister met privately today with some former students of a private Christian school at the centre of an abuse scandal. It was the first time that Dustin Duncan sat down with alleged victims. Caitlin Erickson and Coy Nolan, along with their lawyer, met with Duncan and his team behind closed doors in Saskatoon this afternoon. They were among the first former students to go public with allegations of physical and sexual abuse at the now called Legacy Christian Academy and Mile 2 Church. More than 30 people have filed criminal complaints. Erickson and Nolan say they shared their stories, including experiencing sexual abuse and homophobic exorcisms.
The deputy minister was obviously very shocked by some of the things that we were saying, and I found it very interesting with the amount of notes that they were taking.
I summarized by asking the Minister of Education to close the school because it has 4 decades of victims, and I don't think at this point there needs to be a 5th decade of victims.
The former students are part of a $25 million lawsuit against nearly 24 officials connected to the church and the school, but finding one particular pastor has proven difficult. As Jason Warwick reports, that's prompted an unusual court order.
Nearly 24 current and former officials from Saskatoon's Legacy Christian Academy and Mile 2 Church are being served with papers in a $25 million proposed class action lawsuit. The lawsuit was filed last month by more than 30 students and church members following a CBC News investigation. They say they were subjected to widespread mistreatment and violence that included sexual, physical, and psychological abuse, solitary confinement, and homophobic exorcisms. The lawsuit names 22 people, including former teachers, principals, school directors, and staff from the church or school.
Know this, that when God gives you a word,
all but one of the officials have been served with legal documents. The exception is the church's former pastor, Keith Johnson. He's believed to be in Oklahoma, but court documents show officials have been unable to track him down. Court of King's Bench Justice Grant Curry agreed that Johnson has been evading service. Curry ordered Johnson's son-in-law to serve the pastor with papers.
But when we attempted to serve that order and the claim on the son-in-law, he told our process server to get off his property, don't come back, and if he does, it'll be trespassing.
We were never really allowed to ask him questions.
A former student, who is also Johnson's granddaughter, says she's not surprised by Johnson's actions.
Honestly, I think a lot of it's just his ego. Like, he just has a very big inflated ego, and I don't think he could ever come to the point where he would actually admit any wrongdoing. It's also just kind of like classic cult leader.
If the relative doesn't give Johnson the papers, or if Johnson fails to respond to the lawsuit, it could proceed without him and he would be left without a defense. Johnson was unable to be reached by CBC News by phone, email, or other means. Jason Warwick, CBC News, Saskatoon.
The murder trial for Dylan Whitehawk was expected to wrap up in Regina on Friday, but now it's on hold for more than a month. The 28-year-old has pleaded not guilty to the first-degree murder of Regina mother Keisha Bitternose in 2020. The trial delay is related to witness testimony. The defense and judge say they want transcripts of the last 3 Crown witnesses so they can better review the evidence. Several former gang members testified that Bitternose's death was premeditated and part of the inner workings of the Indian Mafia gang. The defense has argued witnesses were too drunk or too high to be reliable. Whitehawk is due back in court in early November. A Saskatoon man says he is frustrated that his family from Afghanistan is still waiting for refuge in Canada. The federal government promised to prioritize the families of Afghan interpreters who served the Canadian Armed Forces. Pratush Dayal reports.
Sadiq Ibrahim was forced to flee Afghanistan 12 years ago and hasn't seen his family in person for years.
It's very difficult to wake up every morning and not knowing what's going to happen to your family.
He worked as an Afghan interpreter with the Canadian Army until 2010 when his life was threatened and he found refuge in Canada. He worried for the safety of his elderly parents and 5 siblings, so in 2017 he applied for them to become permanent residents in Canada under humanitarian and compassionate grounds. While they waited, he moved them to India. But nothing has happened with their file, despite being approved last year under a special program for Afghans who assisted the government of Canada.
The government is equally responsible and should provide the means and support them. And I mean, Afghan interpreters are relatively educated mostly, and they're fairly more established, and they can do a lot for their families and for their relatives.
The Saskatoon man feels isolated and says his mental health is suffering with these delays from the Federal Immigration Department.
Why they're holding up on the final approval of my family's application. It doesn't take long.
The Canadian government has committed to resettle 40,000 Afghan people in Canada. Since August last year, nearly 17,600 Afghans and their family members have arrived. Ibrahim says some families in Afghanistan are being hunted by Taliban because they have helped the Canadian forces. I spoke with a 16-year-old in Kabul who says he was beaten for hours, whipped and tortured multiple times just because his uncle worked with the Canadian forces. Ibrahim now worries the same fate for his relatives in Afghanistan.
I have been so exhausted with the government. I don't want anybody else to go through that.
Ibrahim says with each passing day, his hope for reunification in Saskatoon is fading. Pratish Dayal, CBC News, Saskatoon.
The Canadian Forces Snowbirds out of 15 Ween Moose Jaw are once again cleared to fly. The team was on an operational pause after an emergency landing in Fort St. John, BC on August 2nd. No one was injured, but the aircraft was damaged. The commander responsible for Operational Airworthiness Authority lifted the operational pause effective today. That said, the investigation continues. So far, they have learned it was engine failure due to an improperly assembled oil filter. The Snowbirds will start flying in Moose Jaw next week. That's also when the aircraft in Penticton and Fort St. John will start the return home. But because the team hasn't flown since August 2nd, they don't have enough practice flying hours, so the rest of the 2022 performance schedule is canceled.
Which is the best?
I mean, the cherry. I mean, everyone seems to like the cherry.
Yeah.
The city of Regina is celebrating National Tree Day today with the second tree seedling giveaway of the year in Victoria Park. 1,000 tree seedlings were handed out this morning, and you had your choice. Up for grabs, Carmine Jewel Cherry, Ben Nevis Black Currant, Japanese Empress Elm, and Honey Queen Raspberry. As the seedlings grow into trees, they'll join the more than 500,000 others already planted in the Queen City. Stay with us. We'll be back after the break.
This weather update is brought to you by Capital Ford Lincoln, making back to busy easy.
Oh, I know we don't want to talk about snow just yet, but Regina residents should be ready to clear snow from their property or potentially face a fine. The city says it will officially start enforcing its snow removal bylaw this fall. That means nearby sidewalks must be clear within 48 hours of a snowfall, and those who don't face a $100 fine. The city could also call in a contractor to clear the snow, and if that happens, the residents looking at a potential $300 bill on their property tax account. The bylaw has actually been active since the beginning of this year, but the city was using the first winter to educate people instead of punishing them. And those who are unable to clear their sidewalks, they will be assisted through the city's Snow Angels program. I'm not ready to talk about snow, but Ethan, it is cool out there in the evening.
Yeah, it certainly has been getting very chilly, below 0 degrees these past couple of nights. Don't worry, No snow in our extended forecast, I can tell you that right now. But yes, indeed, a little bit of frost expected, and there are advisories now out. Yesterday, it was the western half of the south and central region, but don't worry, eastern half, you won't get to miss out because tonight it's your turn. Regina, Estevan, Yorkton, Hudson Bay, and outlook Watrous over to the Moose Jaw region and down toward Assiniboia, Gravelbourg. You'll get a double dip of frost advisories. You had it yesterday, you'll get it again tonight as well. So you know what to do, bring those plants in. Now, just because there's an advisory on the eastern side doesn't mean that that western side is going to miss out. There is some patchy frost possible on that side of the province, and you will also be contending with fog along the eastern side of the province as well. Estevan upward toward Hudson Bay. I think Regina, we should escape it, but keep that in mind for your morning commute as well. Now, temperatures right now across the province are not too bad, sitting in the mid-teens, right at or just below where we should be this time of year. Especially, of course, in southwestern Saskatchewan, where temperatures are getting close to 20 degrees at this point. 12 right now in Yorkton. That's our cool spot at the moment. Winds quite different than where they were yesterday. We were seeing gusts up to 60 kilometers an hour. Almost calm conditions right now for a good portion of us. And even up in the northwest corner of the province, gusts not too significant there. That's where they're the worst today. Now, we are watching for a system to be moving into the southwestern part of the province tomorrow around the noon hour. This is really the only activity that's going to be happening over the next couple of days in the province. And it moves in around that the noon hour, kind of early afternoon hours to the southwest, and then it'll work its way eastward. Regina, Moose Jaw, down to Assiniboia, Gravelbourg. We'll be seeing that move in through the late evening hours tomorrow, and then quickly dissipates as it moves eastward. Clouds beginning to break as we head through the day on Friday, but cloud cover likely still lingering in the Parkland region and the southeast on Friday afternoon. Rainfall accumulation not going to be too significant. We're looking maybe between 5 and 7 millimeters in the southwest. As that system moves east, we'll see maybe 2 to 4 millimeters, but Regina, Yorkton, Saskatoon northward, not too much in the way of precipitation. Now, wind gusts will also pick up as we see that system move through, close to 50 kilometers an hour in the south of the province tomorrow. Gusty in the central region, and then that will back off for the evening on Thursday before those gusts reappear as we head through Friday, and the weekend likely going to be gusty as well. Now, tomorrow, the first official day of fall, or at least part of it will be. Of course, that is when the most direct rays of the sun start to shift to the south of the equator, and we will see fall take place right here in the prairies in Saskatchewan at 7:03 p.m. tomorrow, and we will welcome it in Regina with some not bad temperatures, 16 degrees. Again, breezy conditions. Those will hold on through the weekend before returning to normal conditions. Saskatoon, we're looking for 18 degrees tomorrow, just a little bit warmer for you, and then a nice week ahead. So the countdown is on, Sam. I got my watch set, T-minus 24 hours-ish to fall.
I was just thinking how nice it is that we're going to spend the last few hours of summer together tomorrow.
Isn't that going to be beautiful?
It's going to be something with all that wind and frost you're telling me about.
That's true. Let's forget about that.
Thanks, Ethan.
You bet.
Well, Saskatoon's largest curling rink will not be opening this year. The Granite Curling Club is normally very busy with bonspiels and other events. Last November, it was host of a 2021 World Junior Qualification event. That's where Canada's representatives were chosen for the 2022 World Junior Curling Championships. But this year, it's run into some serious building maintenance problems. When the ice plant was started, brine began leaking through the concrete. The building is nearly 100 years old, and organizers say the problem has to be fixed. Next steps for the club will be talked about after the annual general meeting in November. We'll be back after the break. Russian President Vladimir Putin has announced Moscow's first troop mobilization since the Second World War. He's calling up hundreds of thousands of reservists to fight in Ukraine. And there was a chilling warning, a thinly veiled threat about his willingness to use nuclear weapons. Briar Stewart has the latest.
In cities across Russia, some took to the streets trying to denounce a war and a plan to force hundreds of thousands to fight in it. The arrests came quickly. This morning, people in Russia learned the government will call up 300,000 reservists, mostly young men who went through basic training. But some already knew a draft was underway.
I'm not happy with this. I want we and other countries to live in peace.
We're only identifying this student by his first name, Georgi. But the 23-year-old received a draft notice on Monday. He hopes to be exempted, but knows there are no guarantees.
Частичной мобилизации.
He and his family watched Putin's address in disbelief.
I was shocked. My mother was crying.
Russia's move to call up reservists is a sign of how much its military is struggling. Last week, it was pushed back from a large area near Kharkiv. Today, the Defense Ministry said that nearly 6,000 soldiers have died so far, a significant underestimate, say Western officials. And it was the West that Putin took aim at during his pre-recorded address. We will, without question, use all the means at our disposal to protect Russia and our people, he said. This is not a bluff. He said the 4 Ukrainian regions that plan to hold referendums have Russia's full support. After all, they're all currently occupied by Russian troops. By voting to join Russia, analysts say it sets the stage for further escalation.
He will exactly to organize the referendum, to state that those regions are integral part of Russia. And if someone will attack or conduct any kind of military operations, the use of nuclear weapons will again be raised.
On the streets of Moscow, hours before the evening's protest, many were supportive of the government's plan and say the referendums are a long time coming. They want to live decently. That's why they're looking to be rescued by joining Russia, said one man. We need to protect them, and we need to be united in everything. But Russia's war next door now feels even closer to home, and it will get harder for some to keep carrying on as if life here hasn't changed. Briar Stewart, CBC News, London.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy addressed the UN General Assembly today. He appeared via a pre-recorded message and, in English, called for Russia to be held accountable for its crimes against Ukraine.
Ukraine demands punishment for trying to steal our territory, punishment for the murders of thousands of people, punishment for tortures and humiliations of women and men, punishment for the catastrophic turbulence that Russia provoked with its illegal war, and not only for us, Ukrainians, but for the whole world.
Zelenskyy laid out what he called 5 non-negotiable conditions for peace. They include punishment for Russian aggression, restoration of Ukraine's security, territorial integrity, and security guarantees. And Ethan's back with one last look at tonight's weather.
And a bit of a frosty night in Regina, as mentioned, Sam. We are looking at a low tonight down to around the freezing mark or just below that. We'll be at 5 degrees by the time we get to 8 a.m. though, and there will be mainly sunny conditions. Those southeast winds already gusting close to 40 kilometers an hour at that point. They'll continue to pick up as we head to the noon hour. 14 degrees, sun and cloud, and keep in mind showers building in later in the evening hours tomorrow. Now for Saskatoon, you should escape the rain. You'll wake up at 6 degrees tomorrow. Southeast winds a little less than what we're seeing in Regina. 16 by the noon hour, close to 40 kilometer an hour gusts there. And some beautiful sights out at Mud Creek, thanks to Bob. That's in Prince Albert National Park. Looks like a mirror on the water, and those fall colors starting to look very nice, Sam.
Gorgeous fall colors, till that wind you told us about is going to come
frost.
through.
Did I mention that?
Thanks, Ethan.
You bet.
And that is it for us tonight. For News Anytime, you can always head to our website or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Glenn Reed will be back with more local news tonight at 11. Thanks for watching, and have a great night.